Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Blabbit. Blabbit's where we bring experts in their field so that we can ask them questions and learn interesting things for free. So if you have any questions, please add them to the wherever you're watching us. As always, Blabbit is brought to you by Open Doors. Open Doors is your premier communication and business um, interaction expert. Heck, it's Friday. I'm dead, Paul. How are you?
I'm just kind of cruising along here, Glenn. It's great to see you. I know that you are a traveling man. You are moving around quite a bit. You're a moving target, as they say. But
Would you
I'm
like to
glad that we I'm glad that we've pinned you down for this edition of Blabbit, and I can't wait to hear insights from our guest, who has been a frequent guest here on Blabbit. But we will get to her in just one moment. Glenn, do you want to give everybody a rundown on who you is and how you is?
I will do my best to not get my tongue tied like the last time. Glenn Ingram, I've been working with helping people become better listeners so that they can be better influencers. Yes, sales is not a four-letter word to help people make good buying decisions.
Nice.
How about you, Paul?
Well, my name is Paul Geiger. I am a public speaking advisor out of New York City, and I work with successful leaders who want to stop merely communicating and start really inspiring. And speaking of inspiring, hello, Joanne. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, and I'm just thrilled to have been invited back. I love speaking with both of you, and I was flattered and pleased when you reached out to have a conversation as we round out 2022.
I know, it's amazing. It's amazing how much time has gone by. Could you give everyone just a little bit of a short bio on you for anyone who is not familiar? I find that hard to believe, but please.
Oh, there are millions who aren't, I'm sure, tens of millions. So I am what I refer to as an integrative coach. By integrative, I mean that I weave together what I think are the most powerful practices in both personal and professional development. I coach a lot of C-suite executives. I've developed an interesting, inadvertent, but delightful specialty in first-time first-time chief executives, executive directors, and also founders. So I work with both individuals and teams on what I refer to as transformational growth.
Excellent. Nice. Well, welcome back, Joanne. I was stalking you a little bit today to see what you've been up to lately. And so I want to talk to you about a video that you posted on LinkedIn yesterday that was about an organization that you're on a board for. But I think it really probably the same concepts go across anything we're talking about on a business or a personal relationship matter, where is having difficult conversations and being able to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
So in this climate, how do you coach people on having difficult conversations and understanding just because we don't see eye to eye doesn't mean we hate one another?
Yes, imagine. So I'm so glad you asked me to talk about this. And as you noted, Glenn, I've been speaking privately and publicly about this a lot recently. It's been on my mind, not just because of what's happening in the political and societal environment, but what's happening inside organizations as well. And one of the things that I've noticed is that we seem to be losing the ability to speak to people who have a different perspective or opinion. And one of the ways I coach my clients to work through this, not around it, but really through it, is to take being right off the table, which is not easy for a lot of us who like to, get our way. But if being right weren't the objective, how would you have a conversation where people come to it with different points of view? With a sincere commitment to coming out the other end aligned, feeling good about the outcome, even if it wasn't the one that you sought, and ready sort of to move into action without harboring resentment or frustration. And I think that's one of the key things also, is that you want to work through these kinds of issues in a way that doesn't leave you still holding on to, feeling like, oh, shoot, I didn't get my way, or I don't really believe that this is what we should do. There are lots of ways to achieve this. So I don't know if you want me to jump in right away or you have other questions, but I think that there are a number of ways to achieve this.
Well, can I just make one quick comment? And that is, you brought up a really interesting word in all of that explanation, and that is the word belief. And isn't it so often that our beliefs, the things that we hold true, these are all tropes that we hear.
Right.
These are the things that I hold true. These are the things I believe in. Don't they often work to our disadvantage as well when we are in a situation in either a disagreement or two different points of view? How do you navigate still holding on to your beliefs, but still being open-minded enough to listen to a different perspective?
Yeah, that's such a good question. You know, first thing that comes to mind is, strong beliefs lightly held, right? So you can have a belief, but like not hold on to it with a, death grip and be in a moment of existential crisis if somehow there's something that asks a question of that belief. So I think one of the companion attributes and verbs, quite frankly, to belief is curiosity. So you can hold a belief, but also be curious about someone or something that, if not in opposition, is at least different to that. As Glenn said, I was talking about it in one of my videos with respect to a board that I chair, that I have the great privilege of chairing. And it was very important to me as we looked at building out the board that we build out diversity of perspective, not just check the box kinds of diversity, but diversity of perspective, because I believe that the best decisions for the organization will be ones that reflect that diversity of perspective. And so oftentimes, in fact, this happened yesterday in a meeting that I was in with one of the committees of this board. I said, this is my opinion, but I may be the chair, but I'm one vote. And I will tell you what I think. But if the group goes in a particular direction, then off we go. And I'm not going to pout, and I'm not going to get in the way, because I believe that is the right thing to do. So I might still have my belief about it, Paul, but I also have to be willing to go with the majority if that's what the bylaws indicate, and to do so without feeling, as I said, sort of resentment or holding a grudge, but understanding that that's part of the process, and that other people also have their beliefs, and that when a majority feels really strongly that this is in the greater good, you have to be willing to see that. And it's not always easy, by the way. I'm saying this, sort of like this, but it's not always easy to do that.
It seems like it's getting more and more difficult. I know I was having a conversation with someone about subject ABC a couple months ago, and it was something I didn't agree with, but so I was asking questions, because there's a lot of times that I'm wrong on a daily basis. So it doesn't bother me to be wrong about something if I can learn and have a different point of view. And finally, after asking these questions, this person, they finally said, we shouldn't talk anymore. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, we think completely differently. And I said, if we thought the same, wouldn't it be awful a boring conversation?
Exactly. And also think about it, like the world would be so much poorer, and our companies and organizations and relationships would be so much poorer if we all agreed all the time. It's good to have things challenged. And back to your question, Paul, when your beliefs are challenged, to double down on a phrase I used a moment ago, instead of taking it as an existential threat or crisis, can we see it as an opportunity to maybe hone our thinking? Maybe we'll change our mind, but maybe in defending our belief, we will come up with a really cogent set of points. And I was going to say arguments, but I'm thinking like lowercase a argument, for why we believe what we believe. And so having them, quote unquote, challenged, if it's done in a respectful way, makes us think a little harder. And I think of what happens in academic settings. You want to have people poke holes in your theories, your arguments, and your theses, because the more people poke, the better you get at defending, and persuading. As opposed to people who go, "Oh yeah, that's fine, I totally agree, no problem." Maybe there's something you've overlooked. So it's also a way of inviting in disagreement in service of sharper thinking.
So let's consider the scenario for a moment that you have become enlightened as an individual, as a leader, as a member of the board, as a member of any organization, and you make it your purpose to go into a conversation, perhaps a conflict conversation, with an open mind, with curiosity, with your beliefs lightly held. What happens when the other person isn't quite at that level of awareness and they start to really shut you down? What do you advise that you do then? Do you walk away? Do you stay with it, as Glenn was saying? Do you keep asking questions, curiosity questions? Maybe they're not having it, and maybe the resolution is not going to happen on that particular day.
Right.
What do you do then so that it doesn't seem like you're trying too hard, or you don't feel like you're trying too hard?
No, it's a great question, and we all face this, right? On a, if not regular, we face this from time to time. I think you have a couple of options. One is you can kind of put an end to the conversation respectfully and say, look, I think we need to just agree to disagree for now. And I'd like to think about it some more. I'm going to invite you to think about it as well. And let's schedule some time to pick up this conversation when we've both given ourselves some time to think. So agreeing to disagree is, I think, a perfectly viable strategy. The other is to kind of name what's going on and say, I feel like you're not open to hearing what I'm saying. I'm not asking you to agree with me, but it doesn't sound like you're even listening. And can I ask that we just try again right now? Can we try to really, to your point, your opening statement, Glenn, about teaching people to listen in service of sales? You can also teach people to listen in service of this kind of conversation, and to sort of say, I don't feel like this is going well. I'd like us to do a better job. And you hear I said us, not you. I'd like us to do a better job. Can we try coming at this in a different way? And maybe that's an opportunity to do what people do in coaching and psychology, which is asking for mirroring, where you say back to the person what you heard them said, right? You don't rebut, you don't interrupt, you don't but them. You actually listen. You have the discipline of just speaking what you heard, not agreeing or disagreeing, but just speaking it. That's an active way of getting people to listen, to try something new. So you can ask for a new approach in the moment. And then I would say another thing to say is, look, the way you're speaking to me is making it really difficult for me to feel like we're going to get through this. And I'm just going to put a stop to it now. We may come back to it, but if you're feeling like really attacked, you can also say, I don't know if that's your intention, but this is the way I'm experiencing this. And I'm going to have to, just say, let's stop. That would be, I think, sort of the last resort, because that doesn't allow for a continuation or doesn't commit to a continuation of the conversation. But if you're feeling unnecessarily attacked, there's no reason for you to stay in a conversation and be attacked, regardless of what the power dynamic is. And that's another thing I wanted to say. When there is a power dynamic at play, right? It's your supervisor telling you this. Or if you're a nonprofit leader, there's always a power dynamic with money. If it's a donor, or if it's a board member and a staff person. So I don't want to be blithe about this. Power dynamics absolutely factor in for how much agency you may feel you have in the conversation. But I think every human being should feel that it's his or her right and ability to say, being spoken to this way is really problematic for me. And I'm going to ask if we can reschedule, because I'm not going to be able to bring my best self to this conversation.
Well, along those lines, a lot of times if we're at an impasse, if we can't agree on something, isn't it just a better idea to let cooler heads prevail? Like you said, let's take a break for a moment. And then when you come back, do that reflective listening, like you said, do that validation, just kind of say, this is what we're talking about now. How do we kind of move forward? And maybe a different time, a different location or whatever will kind of help ease that, so you can have a better conversation if you're at that impasse.
Absolutely. The other thing I didn't say a moment ago that I think is part of this, Glenn, is I think it's also good to remind yourself and the other person or people what the goal is. Right. And so if you say, look, our goal is to decide on a strategy that will lead to revenue growth. Our goal is to make a decision about leading, our top candidate. Our goal is to, et cetera, et cetera. I'm using business examples here. when you say, okay, this is our goal, and you start with where you have agreement, right? Our goal is to, and then be a little detached from what that looks like. So if our goal is to settle on a revenue strategy for 2023, to go in with an open mind and, have your opinions perhaps or beliefs about what the best strategy is, but be willing to listen to others, because the goal isn't that it's my strategy that wins. The goal is that you have a strategy that is actionable and that is going to lead to success. And so reminding yourself and the other or others of that goal can sometimes help move through these bumpier parts. So as I said, I'm, in the middle of a CEO search, right? The goal is clear: to get an outstanding CEO, right? And we can all agree on that. And we may have some different opinions about who the best candidate is, but that's good, right? That's going to elicit lively and important debate. And people's, you have to, if you're really listening, you might hear something that you hadn't thought about. But keeping that laser sharp focus on what are we looking to accomplish together, I find to be very helpful.
Now, you guys, you all know me, and our audience knows me as being the wordsmith, really being attached to certain words. And again, you brought up another word that I hear all the time that we are supposed to not use. And you were giving an example of, you don't but. Mm-hmm. Is it always a better practice to really consciously substitute the word but for the word and?
Always.
Is that the simplest diffusing device that we can give to our listening audience right now?
Yeah. You don't want to be a no but person. You want to be a yes and person, even
right.
if it's the same idea.
Well, what about this? Let's mix and match. How about, it sounds wonderful to be a no. I mean, does not sound wonderful to be a no but person. Wonderful to be a yes and person. Can you be a no and person?
You can, but I don't think it's as powerful. So yes.
Well, yes, but sometimes you may.
Right. But yes. So yes, you can be. I mean, yes, but I just don't like but in general. I think that's where I'm
right.
I'm getting a little stuck, because I think but is a negating word.
If but's getting in the way, how about or?
Or, now there's a good one.
That there's a middle ground.
Right.
All right.
Right.
I think a compromiser.
I think that anything that verbally and linguistically indicates that you've heard and you have a difference of opinion.
Right.
That's why I like and, or maybe or. Yes, no, or we could look at it this way.
Right.
Right. So I think, thank you, Glenn. I think or is a good one. It's just that the but is, when I hear but, it's like when somebody says, oh, just kidding. When they've said something and like your feelings were hurt or something. Oh, I don't think it's just kidding. Well, no, there's some truth in there. I feel like but energetically has that same sort of negating somebody.
Well, it negates everything that comes before it.
Yeah, exactly.
It really does.
And so it's not, and you don't feel heard. You don't feel heard, or you don't feel valued. Like, I can value what somebody says, and I can value them as a person, even if I don't agree with them.
Well, and in some of these conversations, can't it come down to, again, old sales technique? You never say no. We could say that may be difficult, but how about if we can do A or B? So you're giving an option. You're not saying no, you're acknowledging and bypassing.
Yep. I think absolutely. It's like, I do a lot of coaching of teams that work in media and journalism. And much of the coaching that I'm doing in a number of programs is around helping people think about accessing philanthropic support for journalism, which is becoming more and more prevalent, whether an organization is set up as a traditional nonprofit or perhaps a for-profit media company. And so one of the things I've been talking to the leaders about, who I coach, is when no is no for now. When you're talking to a potential funder, no, it's no for now, which doesn't mean you don't want to keep these people on the radar screen, that you don't want to steward the relationship, that you don't want to keep them informed of what you're doing. I think that's a little bit what you're talking about, Glenn. Also, it's okay, I hear no, we're not giving you the money right now. And I accept that. And I look forward to keeping you apprised of what we're doing and of our progress and success, and hope that you'll, be interested and share your feedback. It's that keeping the conversation open. That's what you want to do. You don't want to shut it down, unless you need to shut it down. That's a different set of conversations.
But then again, there is that old emotional bugaboo, the ego. Whenever we get rejected in some way, it's a little hard to just metaphorically turn the other cheek and just go, okay, no, that's all good. That's all great.
Okay. Well, now I'm going to be picky with words. I don't think you have, if you feel disrespected, unheard, dismissed, I don't think we have to say it's all good. I think we can say, this is hard for me. This is hard. This is hard to hear. I'm listening, but it's difficult. I actually feel like society has conditioned groups within it to be fine with things that aren't fine. And I would encourage people not to be.
Well,
that's, look, I said, I remember, going back 20 years now when I was a managing director at an international NGO. And so I reported to the executive director, who's the CEO. And I said to him, I will always tell you what I think. You're paying me well, and, I'm senior. I will always tell you what I think. But if you decide to go in another direction, I'll carry it out, right? That's my job. So I'll be honest with you, but I will go out and do the work. So that's different than what I just said. That's understanding that sometimes our preferred way of doing things doesn't win the day. It's going to happen. And how we move forward after that, I think, is really, really important.
Well, and don't you think the importance of acknowledging that I don't completely agree with this, but I'm going to go along with as a team player, especially if it's a multi-phase negotiation, is going to give you a little bit more weight the next time if they don't agree in the quid pro quo. I did agree with this thing, but I went along with it. I really think we need to go that way. That way you're using the law of reciprocity a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's also making me think, I don't know if this is necessarily the scope of this conversation, but you guys always get me thinking when we were talking.
There is no scope. We go all over the place. Go on, Joanne. If your preferred path doesn't win the day, and the group moves forward, I would say my other word of unsolicited advice is, don't go relitigate that over and over again. That's different than what you just said, Glenn, but that, like, the relitigating, well, as I said, this wasn't the way I wanted to do it. Yeah, not going to win friends and allies that way. So you also have to be willing to let go a little bit as well. Nobody likes a relitigator. And unfortunately, as much as we think we should, we don't win every one of these.
We just don't. And that's just the way it's going to be. It happens in our personal life. It happens professionally. It's not going to win the day. And depending on the kind of environment in which you're working, that may happen more often than less. I mean,
there are very few roads out there that are straight. They always have a turn or a curve or something. So if you can't roll with the punches, you're probably going to be setting yourself up to fail, don't you think?
Absolutely. Getting good at disagreement, Glenn, I think, is incredibly important. It's a part of life. And I am as conflict averse a person as you will ever meet. So it's kind of ironic that I'm sitting here talking to you, but I've had to get good at it, because you can only avoid so much. And at some point you're avoiding it to your own detriment when you have to actually have the difficult conversation. And that's another thing when you're thinking about difficult conversations. I think it's also really important to understand that there's a difference between being kind and being nice. Nice is could be a little bit fake, whereas kind is often comes with more honesty. It also has to come with respect. And so in disagreement, also think about, am I being kind? Am I being kind by offering real feedback and a real insight and doing it in a respectful way, as opposed to nice, which might be like being disingenuous with flattery or something else.
Well, that's interesting because in terms of if we hold on to the need to be right, then there is that responsibility or that perceived obligation
Mhm.
that we have to come up with the answers or we have to come up with a rebuttal. Whereas I am absolutely in agreement with you, Joanne, in terms of put your curiosity right out there.
Right.
Use the language of what if we considered, or
Mhm.
let's stop for a moment and think about this, or okay,
Right.
I'm curious
Yeah.
if, and then go on from there.
Mhm.
Again, that language that allows us to not feel the responsibility that we have to come up with an answer right
That's
there,
right.
or the exact correct answer in order to be right.
Right. Exactly. And I would say there's another um, angle, literally angle. I'm thinking of like angles in a room of that where I had a conversation with somebody who was feeling very kind of attacked. Um, and it was painful for this person. And I understood it, and was going on and on about the attacks. And then I sort of stepped back and I said, why do you think it's happening? It redirected the conversation. As it, I was like, well, I hear this and it is painful. But instead of just like listing out these things, what might the cause be? And if we get curious about that together, maybe there'll be something to learn. So that's the other kind of curious angle in a difficult situation is to ask each participant to be curious about why. Why do you feel so strongly about this? Why is this so problematic? Why do you think this pattern has developed? And not to say it in a challenging way, but in a deeply caring and curious way.
Do you get engagement on that level, or do you get pushback when you
I get both.
you know?
I get both, right? Some
I
people,
ask, I throw some softballs sometimes.
right. No, I get both. Like some people can't go there. It's too hard, or it's
Right.
not something they're interested in. Um, and I get people who have, I think, great personal humility and curiosity who give it a try. And those are the people who grow. You can't grow if you ignore some of these questions. Any of us, any of us. It's very hard to grow if you're just like, marching ahead and your story is the only story.
We spoke about this topic a few times in the past, Paul. And tell me your opinion about this, Joanne, about, sometimes when you're in that leadership role, they're trying so hard not to show deficiencies, not to
Mhm.
show inefficiencies,
Mhm.
that people miss the value of self-deprecation to be able to open up these conversations.
Mhm.
So how do you help people understand it's okay not to know everything? It's okay not to be perfect, even though you're the leader, to be able to have an honest conversation like this and to get people to open up a little bit more.
It's really hard, Glenn. And I think one of the things we can remind ourselves in doing this as leaders, because we're all leaders in different ways in our lives, is that by not knowing everything, you actually open up the aperture and you allow for other people to contribute great ideas and insights and to bring their skills forward. So it's a way to share the space differently by saying, I don't know, or I'm overwhelmed and can't do, right? So it could be a skill that you don't have. It could be time and patience that you've run out of. It could be a number of things where you say, I need resources that you guys have, intelligence, perspective, skill sets, energy, some combination thereof.
As usual.
Real quick, Paul. I
Go
remember
ahead,
one
Glenn.
time that I actually saw someone, their head kind of explode a little bit when I made the comment, it's hard for these flowers around here to grow if you're sucking all the sun. You got to step out of the way a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a great metaphor.
Now, as usual, I am the useful phrases man here on Blabbit, and I'm going to tie together what Glenn said and what Joanne said in terms of tapping into I believe everyone has an innate helpful nature that it can feed into a listener's ego that they're being asked to help. But I also believe in terms of our nature that we want to consider ourselves to be helpful people. So one of the phrases that I love that ties together what both of you said is, I need your help in understanding this, whatever it might be, whatever it might be. Just, I need your help in understanding this. And then you go on to describe either what the problem is, what their perspective is, your hesitancy about adopting some idea. It could be any of those things, but that opening phrase, I believe, is very disarming.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It goes to curiosity. It goes to openness. It goes to not being judgmental. Right? There's a lot of integrity in the way you phrase that, I think, and it serves as an honest invitation.
Yeah. And it's so interesting if you change a couple of words, if you happen to step the wrong way and say, I don't understand. As soon as you start that way, it sounds like I didn't listen. If you say, I didn't understand, I need your help in understanding is so much better than saying, I don't understand, because it just seems like you're already putting up a wall.
I'm going to add to that, because I know this is something you love as well as words, is the way the words are said, right? So the tone of your voice and your body language. I did a talk a week ago on enoughness. It was really fun, and it was live. It was so great. There were people in the room. We had so much fun in this beautiful, beautiful resort in front of a fireplace, just setting the stage for you. It was quite delightful. And so I gave this talk on enoughness, and I said, think of the word enough. Like, it can be like enough. Anybody who has children, right? Enough. It can be enough, like crying uncle, like enough. It can be enough, like I can't eat one more thing. Enough. Or it can also be, thank you, I have enough. And so even the way that we say it ties into the way it's heard and responded to.
Absolutely. So much of it is that delivery. I mean, I could take the phrase that I just introduced a few moments ago, and instead of saying, I need your help in understanding, you could say, I need your help in understanding. And the tone totally throws it out the window.
Right. So don't forget tone and body language, as well as the words themselves. Very, very important. And I would say on screen, the way we are now, and tone in writing by email, that much more critical. If you're not there to read the room, physically, it's that much harder. You may be misread.
Yeah, it's not always really easy to read the room when you are working virtually on whatever platform you're working on. That can be difficult. There's even more of a feeling of having to give before you get in that regard. So it's even more essential that you be curious, you be open, vulnerable, all of those things, because you have to put yourself out there before you're going to get any of that response or feedback back that you need in order to make course correction and adjustment in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You really have to have all of your powers of observation, especially when you think things are going to be difficult or the message is difficult. You have to have all of them really, really tuned well.
Right.
Well, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, but have you had luck getting people to understand the importance, the immense necessity of validation and reflective listening anytime you're in a work or a negotiation environment? So just by, again, understanding what they're saying, having them understand that you understand what they're saying, will get you so much further in negotiation than just not doing that.
Oh, regularly, Glenn. I mean, I've used it with people successfully in performance reviews. I've used it in co-founder negotiations. I've used it in, different kinds of team dynamics, especially in like threes where that can be problematic. I've seen it work in so many different ways. And I go back to what I said a couple of minutes ago. It's really important in those situations to state what the goal is and to make sure that everybody's got the same idea of what you're driving towards, because then you can always go back to that. Remember, guys, this is what we're here to talk about. This is what we're here to achieve together. Mm-hmm. And to continue to come back to that is very, very useful. The other thing is another approach or technique. I was thinking about this. So I just mentioned performance reviews, and for a number of people who might be listening, this is performance review season, as well as eating, drinking, partying, and present season. It's also performance review season for people whose fiscal year is a calendar year. And I remember coaching a very senior person in an organization where I was coaching a number of people, and she was, had some apprehension going into her performance review. And she was very A-type and brilliant, and it had listed out all of her accomplishments and all of her goals. And she had qualitative and quantitative measures. Brilliant, brilliant person. And I sort of looked at all this and I said, okay, now put that aside. And I said, how do you want your boss to feel? How do you want him to feel? Not you. How do you want him to feel at the end of your performance review? Right? Different kind of a question. And she said, I want him to feel that I'm on his team. I said, great. So when you go into the conversation, remember that. You've got all your points here. That's fine. But when you choose the words and the tone and the things that you're going to emphasize, make sure that you are pointing those things towards your goal of having him feel that you're on his team. And, I wouldn't be sharing this. I would say it worked really well for her. And I said to her, you have to text me afterwards and tell me how it went. And she did. But that's another piece of this. So that's not conflict necessarily or disagreement, but it's certainly a fraught interaction. And so the other thing that you can think about is not only what points do I maybe want to make, even if, I'm successfully not too focused on being right, but, but also how do I want the other person to feel when this interaction is over? Because chances are you don't want them to feel beat up. You don't want them to feel railroaded, right? You may want them to feel something, we could come up with we could brainstorm a nice list of how you might want them to feel. So that's another thing to think about in conflict or disagreement, is to try to project a little bit to the end. Okay, when we get up from the table, go off Zoom, walk out of the room, whatever it is, how do I want them to feel?
So when you're doing this type of conversation, and I learned this from one of those seminars with this big type sales speaking person 20 some years ago, it's amazing how much better your outcome becomes when you just simply have an agenda. This is what we're looking to accomplish. When we're done with this is the goal we want for that. So like your opinion about agendas and creating an agenda that way. And sometimes when things get off task, you say, well, we'll get to that. But remember, we have the agenda.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Here's what we're here to accomplish together.
Mm-hmm. You bring up a really interesting topic, and there's a lot of synergy between performance reviews and actually getting up to public speak. You talk about how do you want that listener to feel? It's the same thing. And what you were just describing, Joanne, was taking something that is analytical, that's informational, and making it experiential. And I think that's very true of the people that I coach in terms of public speaking. It would seem that in performance reviews and also when you get up to speak in front of a group, you would think that part of the agenda would be to show them how smart you are, to show them that you are an expert. But that is not, you have to dig a little bit deeper. How do you want them to feel? when they're done. It's not a matter of them being impressed with you. And you can see
Right.
that slippery slope in a performance review. It's also a slippery slope as a public speaker, because there's that constant feeling of validation, of needing to prove that you are the expert, or else why would all of these people be listening to me? You have to go beyond that and literally say, what do I want them, ideally, what do I want them to feel by the end of this talk? Because that's what they're going to take with them.
That's right. They're going to take the stories and they're going to take the feelings.
Yeah.
They may or may not take the facts.
It's the old adage, statistics tell, stories sell.
Yeah. And we all have, there are stories in all of these kinds of scenarios that we've been discussing.
Absolutely. So in terms of how involved do you get with storytelling? Just in your experience, Joanne, it seems, because you are an integrative coach and work with organizations, very often the bottom line is the bottom line, and efficiency is a huge factor. How much exploring the various storylines that obviously can get the job done 10 times faster than facts and graphs and slides? How much do you get into? How much do you experience that? It could be a lot, it could be a little. I don't know. What's your experience?
I actually get into it a lot. No, you may not have known that was another softball question. I get into it a lot in a couple of ways. I'll start with one, which is when people come to me and they're in a transition and they're talking about interviewing or thinking about their next thing. And I say to them, for every single accomplishment that you have on your CV, I want a story. Every single accomplishment, everything you said, I raised X amount of money, I grew from this to this. I said, I want a story for everything. In every interview, you're not going to have a chance to tell every story, but you're going to have to be in the moment, and you're going to have because the story is what people are going to remember about you as a candidate. Right. So when it comes to individual career transitions, we deal a lot with story. I referenced earlier work that I do with media companies accessing philanthropic funds. It's all about story. Now, these are journalism organizations who are really good at it. But what I work with them on is, what is the story of the person you're listening to? What do they care about? What are the problems they want to have solved in their community? What do they think is missing from the coverage? What are the stories that they want to have told about the community? What story have they heard over and over again, and it's not making a difference? So there's a lot. And then when I work with them on pitch decks, the pitch is not about, here's why we're so awesome. The pitch is, here's the need that we see, and here's the way that we want to address it. We get to the appendix is, you're so awesome, and all of the stats on why you are a worthy recipient of financial support. But the story that you start with is, here's the problem that I see in the community, and here's the way I want to go about addressing it. So storytelling has a large place in my work with teams and in my work with individuals. And the other thing I would say is to invoke the great and awesome Brené Brown with her framework of the story I'm telling myself when I'm working with leaders or others, and particularly people in conflict. I ask them to be honest about what story they might be telling themselves about a situation, and then to find out if it's true.
And I appreciate that so much. I've been involved with a nonprofit in kind of inner city youth in Omaha, Nebraska for years, even though I'm not living there. And it's, I think, interesting when you can not just tell kind of the overall story. The little statistic that really stood out to me was when they helped young kids get play sports, no fees, to get off the streets, and maybe find out that there are some people in law enforcement that are okay. Just the statistics that you saw 5 years, 8 years later. So where I said stats tell and stories sell, this stat was a story that I tried to tell them they need to emphasize more, because you're improving your community by these statistics.
Right. Well, in that case, the statistic is in measurement of impact.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so if you say, the impact we're having is supported by these numbers. So numbers alone may not do it, but numbers with a narrative, well, then you got gold.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And isn't it true anytime you hear a story or you hear something and in your mind you may say the words, well, that makes sense. It's not actually logical. Now, is it? It's
Mm-hmm.
almost always emotional.
Yeah.
When you say that makes sense, what you're really saying is that feels right to me
Mm-hmm.
when I
Right.
hear that.
And it may feel right because you've had a similar experience.
Right.
Or that
Right.
rings true because of what you have seen as a person, as a professional. Depends on what the setting is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, that story is, it's everywhere. And if we can think of ourselves as storytellers, then to go back to a little bit where we started the conversation, in conflict, when you're in disagreement, let's not say conflict, when you're in disagreement, have you already told yourself a story about the other person's perspective? Like, have you already written off their story? Maybe.
Oh, yes, the anticipation, it comes under the guise of, I need to be prepared.
Right.
But in actuality, what you're doing is you're playing out the story before it plays.
That's right. That's right. So you've already got a story about the other person's perspective, viewpoint, proposal, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the challenge is to say that my story may or may not be true. Maybe it's true, but also maybe not. And I'll give you an example of how I use this in coaching. This goes back many, many years. Early in my coaching career, I was coaching an extraordinary client. So just warm place in my heart for her. And she was a very senior person in a New York City-based not-for-profit organization. And she told me that she didn't feel that her board really saw or understood or appreciated the work that she did. And it wasn't like a woe is me. It was more just like an observation. I just don't think I don't think they really see me. I don't think they really understand the work that I'm doing and kind of the challenges that we're facing here day to day. So I said to her, okay, here's your homework for the next week. This is Heyman Partners kind of homework. I said, I want you to go out and I want you to find 3 pieces of evidence that you're wrong. Just 3. So I just want you to be alert to them. I'm not asking you to go to create anything. I just want you to be super observant and see if you can find 3 pieces of evidence that theory that you have just articulated to me is wrong. She's like, okay, I'm game. And I swear I'm not making this up. She went downstairs later that day. She went out on the street. She happened to run into a board member in the neighborhood in which the office was. And the board member said to her, I don't know if we told you this, but you are doing an unbelievable job. Now, I really am not making it up. It's a little manifesty, so I know we're going to go there. But just being able to say, here's a story I've got. And I'm just going to now be really curious to see if there is a counterfactual. And I'm just going to be open to hearing it or seeing it if it shows up. So sometimes it really is that simple. Not always, but sometimes.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful advice to break out of the cycle of the stories that we tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to do it, as I've just tried to, was like with some humor and say, just entertain the possibility. Maybe there's another version of this story that's out there that you're not aware of.
Right.
Well, and just in full disclosure, as was in the fine print when you agreed to show up here, Joanne, I am stealing numbers with narrative.
All yours.
I have another, I'm going to tag this as another useful phrase. I want to go back for just a moment. You were talking about individuals who are looking to make a career change and then be a part of the interview process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think regardless of how much experience you have, and I do some interview prep as well, and I've worked with new graduates, college students, all the way up. And I think one of the really, again, disarming phrases whenever you tell one of your stories is to start by saying, one of the most important things I learned was this. Mm-hmm. Because when does learning ever go out of style?
Not that they never go out of style. We should be learning throughout our entire lives.
And again, very disarming phrase. When you use words like that, instead of immediately going to try to impress somebody, you immediately show your humility by saying, I had something I needed to learn. And now, at this point, looking back, I understand what that is.
That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, Paul. I love it. I'm going to take that.
Awesome.
Yeah, from you, we can do a little bit of, this is like our secret Santa sharing.
That's right.
I think that's fantastic. I have nothing to add. I think it's brilliant.
Okay, so speaking of Secret Santa, end of the year, Glenn, if you don't mind, I'm going to interject this really quickly. I want to go around the horn, and I want everyone to talk about, just give us an idea of what you're looking forward to in the new year. It's not a resolution. It's not a moment of change. It could be something you're looking to change, or something you're looking to embrace in a more powerful way, in a more personal way, or in a more professional way. Joanne, do you want to go first with that?
Sure. I'm looking forward to slowing down in 2023 and doing deeper by doing less.
Amen to that. Glenn, how about you?
Well, I always, the best form of flattery is impersonation, right? Yes, I'm working on, let's say, semi-retiring in 23, having fun every day, not just on Fridays for half a day off, and working on being a slower listener, because sometimes I respond too quickly. So I need to have that pause and listen slower before I reply to people. So slower listening is my main objective.
And in 2023, I am going to embrace varying perspectives even more. Understand that as much as I am often someone else's eyes and ears on the outside, I need quite a few sets of eyes and ears on my outside. So I'm going to embrace that with abundance, and abundance will follow.
And it will.
Well, and it's no surprise that our conversation with Joanne has gone by in the blink of an eye. So, Joanne, if anyone would like to contact you, what's the best way to do so?
So you can reach out to me through my website, which is heymanpartners.com, HEYMAN partners.com. And there's a contact page, and you can contact me through that. You can also contact me via Instagram, where I have a little bit of a presence, and it's just at Joanne Heyman. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and love to converse on LinkedIn and share articles and things like that. So those are the three best ways.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, no, I just wanted to say happy holidays to you, Joanne, and to you, Glenn, and to everyone, all of our listening audience. And we really appreciate your time, Joanne, as always. Incredibly insightful.
Thank you. It's always, the time just goes by so quickly. I love speaking with both of you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to explore this pretty necessary conversation that we don't have often enough. So thank you for the invitation.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a good weekend, everyone. Take care.